Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. We are going to be doing a little bonus episode. And as always, I'm Scott Weatherly, and I am joined by Julian. Julian Darius, how are you doing?
I'm feeling quite good, quite disciplined. It's not in this film, but it is by will alone I set my mind in motion.
Yes. I was worried about doing this. You might say I was fearful, but I realised that, no, fear is the mind killer. So we're going to be jumping into this today. And yes, right, we are doing a bonus episode. Usually you'll find us doing some film from sci-fi history, going back to whatever era, whatever decade. But we are doing a brand new film, just released. We are doing Denis Villeneuve, I can't pronounce his name, Dune. So we were going to start with that. Let's just, before we get into anything, I have got a plot summary, and I am going to do it. It's quite. I've tried to keep it short.
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, like, you can summarize the plot in like a couple sentences, but that is going to require answering people's questions about, like, oh, and what's that about? And the answering of the questions is going to take 2 more paragraphs.
Yes, well, that was sort of what I did. I was like, well, I need to mention that, and I need to mention this. So we'll see how that sort of translates to this one. But first, before we get into that, first thoughts about having seen Dune, and also your history of Dune.
Yeah, I have a complex history with Dune. I was a kid when the David Lynch version from 1984 came out. I hadn't read the novel. I kind of loved it, even though I didn't think it was a cinematic masterpiece, but it influenced me. In fact, one of the memories that has come back watching this film is my brother and I used to, this is going to sound completely psychotic, not that anything I say doesn't, but we used to burn ourselves on the stove to make ourselves tougher. And I would, having seen the 1984 version, I would hold my hand as long as I could and say, "It is by will alone I set my mind in motion." And that still is a mantra for me sometimes in times of stress. So, I mean, I have a long history, complicated, obviously. And then I went back and read the novels and stuff, not all of them. But so, I don't know how to feel about Dune. I'm not a Dune fanatic like some people are. But I certainly like it more than Terminator and another sort of, other stuff. I want it to be successful. I love Denis Villeneuve. I've been excited about this movie for a long time. Having said that, I have complicated, mixed views. What about you?
Yeah, it's one of those. I read the first book when I was in university. It was one of those periods I read like Lord of the Rings, and I read Dune and that sort of thing. And I enjoyed it. I hadn't read it since. I have now got a copy, and I'm going to reread. I think because there's things I want to remember and things I think because this is only part 1, so I'm going to try and read it to catch up. And like you, I'm not a, like you say, Dune fanatic. It's not up there as sort of for me as a milestone of sort of like literature that I've sort of clung to. I remember the pacing of the book really being a struggle. Because like reading the first sort of like 150 to 200 pages, and like, they're not even on Arrakis yet. Like, what's going on? Like, I'm well into this book, not much is happening, and it's sort of going back and considering that, it's like, oh yeah, I now know what this book is. It's not, it's not your typical sort of, science fiction is probably sort of, it is science fiction. It's set in the future. It's set on different planets, but it's going for intrigue. This is probably more akin to like Game of Thrones in some respects than than Star Wars or Star Trek.
Yeah, and I think that what sticks with me is like I don't know that it's not my favorite thing ever, but I mean it sticks with me. The designs stick with me, and I love that it's really science fantasy, right? I mean, and while I don't believe the premise of Jodorowsky's Dune that somehow Jodorowsky was going to have made that film and that would have taken the place of Star Wars in the culture, and we'd have a much more adult culture and all of this. I do think there's something, I don't believe that would have happened, but I do think that there's something to the idea of a more adult science fantasy franchise. It's still science fantasy. I mean, it's not hard science fiction. It's not about that stuff, but about ecology, about what a messiah is, about political intrigue, about mysticism and religion and all of these things. Those themes are fantastic, and they haunt me. And I wish that there were a sort of franchise like that that did those things, even if it wasn't hard science fiction.
No, I agree, and because I went back and I've watched like the June and 1984 version, and watching that, you're like, oh, okay, that bit's from the book and that bit's from the book, but there's like so much missing and so much. The one thing about, I'm not going to go and review the whole of David Lynch's Dune, but like the first like hour and a half, hour and 15, hour and 20 minutes is like of a reasonable pace up until like the Harkonnen attack on Arrakis. And then they're like, and here's 400 other pages. And they just sort of like race through it in a montage that would make Rocky proud. And then it gets to the end, and you're like, it's so head spinning, that sort of like third act of the 1984 film, that it's just, it's a hard watch. And so going into this one, I was like, how are they going to deal with these pacing issues? Is it going to be an ensemble film? Is it just going to be, because one of the things as well that sort of like that registers with me is, yes, it becomes about Paul Atreides. He becomes this figure we'll talk about, but it's so packed at the beginning, and there are so many characters that I thought, oh, good, they're going to cut it in half, which means we're actually going to get a lot more of other characters. And you well, we'll get into it whether we do or not, but it felt like I was thinking this was going to be an ensemble film more than it probably was.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting what's cut and what's not, and in some ways, some of those characters like Duncan get way more time in David Lynch's Dune, which is sort of staggering. But it's worth keeping in mind as we set this up that this has been regarded as, in some ways, the masterpiece of science fiction that could never be filmed. And the failure of the David Lynch movie was attributed, among a lot of other things, to the utter inability to ground this world. That the novel takes, like you said, 200 pages of just like history lessons and 10-page philosophical discussions and things like this, and they do it in an interesting way here that we'll discuss. Famously, the Lynch film has many cuts that try to address this and begin with this long monologue, and it's hard to set up all of these aspects of this world before you get into any of the action or the drama.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is, and my feelings on prequels. I think by their very nature they are redundant. If you've initially told a good story, and I'm not saying that Dune isn't a good story, but this world is so massive, the galaxy, the Imperium, that you sort of like, you could do a prequel. And I haven't read all the books, so I don't know. Like, obviously Frank Herbert wrote some, and then his son and other people have contributed. I don't know. That may have happened. There may be prequels. But as in a film, if this could be quite easily, you could say, right, actually, before we get to Dune, the story, you can still have Arrakis. Like, well, yeah, we're going to do an entire film that sets up a bunch of other stuff. Like you could have another film that does all the setup before you even start this film, and it would fill in, stories about like the Bene Gesserit and the relationship between the Harkonnen and the Emperor, or the Harkonnen and the Atreides, and like, like
all that's been done in novels, right?
oh yeah, I'm sure
Anderson and Herbert's son have done all of that. In fact, there's probably more prequels than there were original Frank Herbert novels. So let's hear the summary.
Okay, let's get into the plot then. There you go. So, in the distant future, the human race is spread across the universe in a galactic imperium. The imperium is ruled by an emperor and governed by a series of powerful families. Two of the most powerful families are the cruel Harkonnens, led by Vladimir Harkonnen, Stellan Skarsgård, and the more progressive, led by Leto Atreides, Oscar Isaac. The Harkonnens have an advantage within the Imperium as they control the planet Arrakis, where they harvest spice. Spice is a product used for space navigation as well as many other things, including extending psychic abilities for the religious order, the Bene Gesserit. It has been decided by the Emperor that control of Arrakis will transfer from the Harkonnens to the Atreides. In order to do so, Duke Leto, his son Paul, Timothy Chalamet, head concubine and Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, Rebecca Ferguson, along with their household, will move to Arrakis from their stronghold planet of Caladan. Mining spice is a tough job. The indigenous people of the planet, the Fremen, fight to protect their planet from being harvested. Also, the planet is populated by huge sandworms which create the spice, but are also incredibly dangerous and will destroy anything travelling on the surface that they can find. Duke Leto understands that the only way he is able to successfully transfer and keep up spice production is by making the Fremen an ally. To start this process, he sends one of his most trusted troops, Duncan Idaho, played by Jason Momoa, to find them and start negotiations. In the meantime, Paul is coming of age and the Bene Gesserit are taking an interest in him, as he is starting to have visions of a young woman, Zendaya, and even his own death. He is the product of generations of manipulation to create a prophesied savior figure, the Kwisatz Haderach. Paul has been trained in many disciplines, believing that it was to prepare him to rule House Atreides. The Bene Gesserit do not trust him, as he should have been born a girl, and so start putting him to the test. Moreover, when he reaches Arrakis, Paul notes that the Fremen also have this savior figure as part of their lore. More Bene Gesserit manipulation. As the Atreides family settle in, they find that spice production is going to be hampered by the poor equipment that has been left. In addition to this, the Harkonnens have their own plots and intend to kill off the members of the Atreides family. Some attempts are made but are unsuccessful, and so with the support of the Emperor, the Harkonnens invade Arrakis, destroying the Atreides family and its army. However, it was agreed that Paul and his mother would not be harmed, as they are too important at this stage. The Harkonnen decide that while they cannot harm them, that does not mean the desert cannot, and plan to leave them to die out there. Using the powers learned from the Bene Gesserit order, Paul and Lady Jessica manage to escape into the Arrakis desert. Last paragraph, don't worry. Traveling the desert, they eventually come across a group of Fremen led by Stilgar, Javier Bardem. Stilgar states that they can come with them, but a challenge comes from within the group and Paul must fight the challenger to prove his worth. Paul is skilled, but fears killing the challenger, giving several attempts for the man to yield. When he does not, Paul reluctantly kills him, and Stilgar acknowledges that by their law, Paul and Lady Jessica can now be considered Fremen. The group start to trek across the desert in an uncertain future as credits roll.
Yeah, that's quite a summary. I mean, I would say the basic plot could be summed up as the Emperor gives the spice planet Arrakis to House Atreides, taking it from House Harkonnen. In fact, this is a trap, and Harkonnen and the Emperor are going to attack and destroy House Atreides, which they do. However, Paul escapes and goes into the desert with his mom. Yeah. That's really just that's the plot. And then you have to ask, like, well, what is this spice thing? Well, what are these houses? Okay.
Yeah. And that was where it started with. Originally, I was like, I can sum this up very quickly. But then it's things like well, why is Paul so important? Like, why am I spending so much time with Timothy Chalamet? Well, he's actually considered to be this prophesied character, but they don't trust him. Well, why don't they trust him? Well, because Lady Jessica was supposed to have a girl, but because of her love for Duke Leto, she gave him a boy. And it's like, man, like all of this is in the book, and it's all explained. Like,
Well,
is
it's
it
also
there in
like,
the film?
how much do I explain of this Bene Gesserit order of
Yeah.
witches, that are sort of all female, and in the novel it's a bigger deal that she's not married to Duke Leto, she's a concubine, and so they have Paul is in fact an illegitimate son, although his father treats him otherwise. So, like, is that worth mentioning? I mean, that's a bigger deal in the book than it is in
Yeah.
the film.
I think that would be you can see the times playing out in some of these things. Like the fact he's illegitimate, like I don't think it would work in 2021. Like you play that and you're like, well, what does it matter? Like marriage is such an outdated mode of blah blah blah. And so there's certain things I think they've dropped, and some
Yeah.
of it's quite sensible.
Well, one of the number one thing they've dropped is that Baron Harkonnen, if you remember the Lynch film, he's much more obese. He's got, sores on his
Lesions.
face.
Yeah.
And he's also a homosexual pederast. So having the gay character, molesting and killing boys while having an AIDS era sore on his face. I mean, that has not aged well. And so I think it's wise to eliminate that. One of the things that they can't eliminate, or that I know that Denis Villeneuve wants to address, is this idea of the sort of white savior complex. And in fact, in the novel, it's not at all clear that he is the Messiah. That there is one Messiah, that these prophecies are true in an objective sense. The novel is much more a sort of interrogation of what does it mean to be a Messiah, and Paul plays into this for his own purpose and to find his destiny. That is just much more. I mean, how do you get that in a 2.5-hour movie that's doing 60 other things?
Well, this is one of the interesting things, because it's not just Paul in the novel. If I remember rightly, it's his mother as well. Like she's clearly she's been trained Bene Gesserit. She's a part of the order, and so she's a part of these manipulations. And if I remember, when they get to Arrakis and stuff, and when everything happens, she's the one, like she continues to manipulate things and people to keep bolstering Paul to become this sort of like to protect them. And so that sort of seems that's sort of gone from the thing, which is interesting because they also want to show, and there's parts of this where they're not setting him up as a Neo, or do you know what he like Timothy Chalamet is going to be the savior character in a sense, but he's not like
whoa.
I was going to say that, but it's not like he's not like a pure savior. It's not like he's going to turn up and everything's going to be all right. It seems a lot more controversial. Like there's, I was thinking of like Dancing with Wolves and all these other sort of films, the white savior film, and it does sort of it doesn't quite play anymore. But then the book didn't think that either. Like Paul isn't Neo. He's not Superman. But
I mean, I love the beginning of this film. There's the opening narration by Chani, who talks about, I mean, the opening line is, how beautiful Arrakis is. Just the shot of the desert. I mean, everything there is working. That stuff, that grounding, and she says this line about we're going to find out who our next oppressors are.
Yes.
And that's fantastic, right? This grounding, you open the film with the Native American experience, right? Yeah. Now then that is lost as the film goes on, because that's not really the focus of the film. And then by the time Paul is arriving on Arrakis, you see just scores of Fremen and others lined up chanting that he's a Messiah, and it's like, well, did Lady Jessica cause that? I mean,
well, there's two things really in that one you say about the opening monologue, and it says about the who will be our next oppressor, and then it cuts to Paul in bed of him waking up, So like it's telling you straight away, like, yeah, no, like here is the next oppressor. Like we're not going to hide this. You might be considering him as the white savior, but he's basically gonna make a complete hash of it. But you say about, and this was the interesting. I actually thought this was more interesting because there was a dropped line. There's a couple of dropped lines in this film where they sort of like, obviously it's 2.5 hours, but they've got very much focus on things and they want to give certain scenes a lot more screen time. But when they do get to Arrakis, there's clearly two types of Fremen.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a when he goes out to the guy who's tending the palm trees, which again I love that scene because the guy's like, it takes this much, that's 5 lives a day for one tree for that much water, and I think that's really cool. But you see there's Fremen are all sort of reaching through the gate, and he's like, what's that all about? And the guy tells him, and he's like, oh, okay, so they believe that, and it's then sort of hinted at that that's, well, even before that, they've said, oh, they've been manipulating the people of Arrakis. Like these things have been laid, this new law, this religious sort of prophecy has been laid into their law. But that doesn't mean they all believe it, because then when you meet Stilgar and Chani and the others, they're of the other opinion, like, oh no, we know this is all a bunch of crap. Like we get it.
Also, the doctor who's the ecologist, who's a Fremen,
yes,
whose gender's been changed from the novel.
But yeah, she sort of seems to sort of like shift, doesn't she? Because she doesn't. She's aware. She knows of these prophecies. She's probably grown up with these prophecies and this law, but she doesn't really believe it. She thinks it's nonsense. But then all of a sudden, like he's turned up and he's got like the still suit on and he's put it on like in a specific way.
How to do it.
Yeah, I know how to put trousers on. Oh, well done. You must be the savior. But like there's these things, and you can see that throughout the film, there's a few of these scenarios where things happen where people are like, well, I don't believe it, but this person does seem to fit this criteria, and so they it gives them the second guess, which is what they're supposed to be manipulating. So even then, like Lady Jessica and stuff are supposed to manipulate that, and it's yes, it is. So I kind of like the fact that there was those people there. And is that a comment on people believing everything they see? Fake news? I don't know, whatever you want to do. Manipulated by greater powers, all that kind of stuff. But there are others that are like, no, it's crap, it's nonsense. There is no prophecy. There's just us trying to survive on this planet.
Well, I like that idea, and I like that you're talking about, and I like the idea that our understanding of the world is defined by the parameters that have been given to us. And so, if you are into conspiracy theories and somebody says like, well, do lizard people run the government? You're like, no, that's not true. But then you see a few things. It's like, yeah, I could see why the lizards would want that, So we look for what we are looking for. If you're told, A might be the case, then it becomes a binary proposition, A, not A. And that becomes the psychological terrain by which you encounter new facts and new information. So, I like that idea. Unfortunately, I don't think that it's really, teased out enough, despite the 2.5 hour runtime for half the book.
No, I agree. It's something I just sort of, I was taken away. I took away from it, but I understood it's not front and center, like it's not as teased out as I'd like it. But this comes to another a point actually I want to make before we get. So we're talking about the people of Arrakis, the Fremen, and we get to know quite a bit about them. Like we get bits and pieces about them, and they are native to this. They're not native, sorry, because they've just been there for generations, and they're affected by spice, blah blah blah. We know stuff about them. But we also find out, and we know that like the Atreides come from Caladan, and they are very good. They are the white hats, as it were. Like there's no hiding that. Like they are the good guys. And then you find the Harkonnen planet, and it's basically going to sort of like some dystopian sort of like it's raining all the time and all that kind of crap. One of the things I was
designed by H.R. Geiger.
Yes. One of the things I was curious about, and I was hoping that they would do in this film that they don't, is you don't see common populace of those planets to make a comparison to the Fremen. Do you know what I mean? So I wanted to
Mhm.
see, like, okay, well, if I'm going to see Planet Planet Caladan, you know, how do the Atreides treat the people of that planet that they're ruling on? You know, are they free? Is it a farming world? Are they happy? Is it well populated? Is it, you know, and then go into the Harkonnen world? Is it like what, you know? Is it like entering Brazil or some, you know, or like Dark City or something? You know, what's happening on those worlds, so that when I get to meeting the Fremen, I've got this idea of they're going to project that onto those people. You get told it, but I don't get to see it in the film.
Yeah, I mean, I would like that too. You know, of course, it's a runtime issue.
Mm.
You know, the closest we get is in the sort of cemetery, which is very nicely designed on Caladan, where Leto talks to Paul. And, you know, that stuff is really good. It's all working. And Leto says that they've ruled through air power and sea power, and they're going to have to cultivate desert power on Arrakis. That implies there's been conflict on that planet, right? I mean, this is still very much an imperial power that
Yeah.
is in fact the next oppressors. They're just the myth of the good imperial power. You know, we're going to negotiate with the Native Americans instead of wiping them out.
Yeah, and I was looking for, like, you know, analogs and comparisons, and you know, you can take any imperial idea, like, you know, the British Empire is a very good example of this. Like, you know, yes, we entered the Middle East and we did incredible, you know, in India and, you know, parts of North Africa and Central Africa and also other stuff, like, you know, did very similar things. We were like, yes, you're a very noble people. We like the resources you've had, so we're going to kill you.
Yeah, and we did it in the Philippines and, you know, all
Yeah.
over the world too. We got started a little later and, you know, and wanted to compete with you guys.
Yes, it's a hobby we appear to have given up, at least in this country. You know, not for want of trying, but
Well,
yeah,
maybe we could pull back for a moment and say, like, what is your impression of the film overall, of this Denis Villeneuve version? You know, watching it from start to finish, how does it work for you?
it does work. Um, I think it has. I think this film is good. It works, and I really enjoyed it. I had a really good time with the film. I think a lot of it works. It's one of those though. It clearly felt like part of a story. Character arcs weren't complete. You know, weren't even partway through. You know, character relationships and, you know, stuff. It felt incomplete, and I understand that. And, you know, anyone says, "Well, there's going to be a part two." Yes, and I know you hate these films, but for the Lord of the Rings films, at least when they did that, they were like, "Oh, we've got this ending that's going to end with a cliffhanger, but you're going to get a resolution to at least these kinds of stories. You're going to get these arcs, and, you know, this redemption. So you get like Boromir's redemption and all this other stuff. Like, you're going to at least walk away saying, I know there's more story, but at least I've seen
Something happened.
something happen."
Yeah.
And I think the biggest problem with this film is the biggest event in this film is the invasion of Arrakis,
Yes.
and then it keeps going. And although I'm enjoying the initially, like when he's fighting, when Paul has that fight at the end, I am looking at my watch and going like, when does this thing end? Like, how are they going to get to a resolution? Because it really isn't at a climax point, and then it sort of just stops, and you're like, oh. I get what you're doing, but it just sort of like it does it. This film peters out, and I think that was the problem. It's sort of like,
Yeah, my first impression is phenomenally positive, and I rewatched this a second time to do this podcast, so I've now seen this twice, and I think it starts beautifully with that narration, and then everything you see, it's like, okay, here's Denis Villeneuve, here's your budget, every single. I mean, let's just say there is no object in this universe that is not designed to the nth degree. I
Yeah.
mean, every background, every column in a building, everything that the sort of planes that they use, that every shot is majestic and beautiful. This looks like a lived-in world. This looks like just like no expense was paid to design this thing, down to the sheets on the bed. It's just astounding to look at. And so initially I'm wowed, I'm brought into this universe, and it's about 20 minutes in where that starts to disappear for me. And some of it is the exposition. I'm thinking in that 20 minutes, like, good, you're going for the emotive sort of resonance of these characters. And we get a little bit of exposition and it's done well. But that exposition just continues. And now it's like, okay, now I get to watch the fight scene. And like, what is that fight scene doing? It's introducing the shield technology, and it's introducing the idea that Paul is training, right? Okay, fine. To a lesser degree, it's introducing, I guess, Gurney. But it's not doing enough, and it goes on for 5 minutes. And I know you need a little bit of action at that point, but I just keep getting pulled out of the film. And by the end, I'm like, yeah, I have that sort of like feeling that you do of it being less than the sum of its parts. And
Yes.
This is, and I love Denis Villeneuve. Denis Villeneuve could film two people talking in the kitchen, and I would just want to watch it on mute to just look at how beautiful everything is.
Yeah, you should watch Prisoners. He's done that.
Yeah, right. Well, and I mean, I'm flabbergasted by how good the Blade Runner 2049 is. But the other thing about this is, in terms of coming out of this and having that sort of less than the sum of its parts feeling, is I don't understand this movie. I don't understand this movie on any level. And I want to. I'm a fan of Dune. I love these themes. So you were talking about like what happens, how you structure this. If you're going to shoot half of the story, right, you have a classic opportunity to do a sort of like declining arc followed by an upward arc. The declining arc is all you need to do. The climax is we're attacked on Arrakis, right? It was all a trap. My whole family is wiped out, and I'm left to wander in the desert in the denouement, right? We've lost everything. But there's this promise of, continuing. And then in a second, you rise up and you take over the planet by the end. So there's this, it's the first half of Superman 2, the second half of Superman 2. It's Daredevil Born Again. It's the, decline all the way down, rise all the way up. Okay, well, that should be what this movie is. Instead, you have this attack halfway through. I don't really feel like that's the climax. And then, you have all of these scenes of him going out into the desert, and there's, so much stuff there and so many other characters. And by the end, I feel like, I don't, you were talking about not having a sort of character arc. That should be the character arc of I've lost everything. We've lost everything, and now I'm living, with the Fremen. It's structured so strangely, and I don't feel as if, it tells that story.
Well, one of the things I thought was that I struggled with that third act. Well, I don't know, like, is it fifth act? No, is it a 5-act structure? It's hard to tell how they're structuring it. But one of the things I find that last act really cold, in emotional, and it's bizarre because I think there are times in this where, like, Timothy Chalamet's good. He's a good actor. He's got a charm. He's got a charisma. He's a good-looking guy. Like, he's got the package, right? He can do his stuff. And also, you've been introduced to like Oscar Isaac, and Oscar Isaac's playing this fatherly figure as the sort of the good Duke Leto Atreides. So when he dies, when Judge Leto is taken out, like, and you've sort of, they've garnered this sort of relationship between him, between Leto and Lady Jessica, of like, he says that I should have married you, and they clearly sleep in the same bed. They've got a relationship. Yes, they're not married, but they've got this relationship, right? They trust each other and more. But when he dies, there's no like emotional ramification for that. They just like piss off into the desert, and they're like, then they're sat in a tent, and there's not like there's no emotion about it, there's no grief, there's no like, you know, this should be like they are abandoned, right? Like you said, they have been stripped to their lowest point. They are trapped in the desert, which is dangerous. They're likely to die, if not of thirst or exposure, then the sandworms, whatever. People they love have been killed. You know,
everyone almost.
Yeah, like as far as they know, Duncan Idaho's gone, Gurney's gone. That Duke Leto's gone. Yet there's no sense of loss in the characters, and so when they face up to the Fremen, and he beats that guy, there's no sort of sense of like he's worked through something, or good or bad. Do you know what I mean? For me, and again, I know I'm a sod for doing this, but like they should be in that desert, and it should feel desperate. Like it should feel like absolute agony for them. There should even be questions of like, why do we carry on? Like, yeah, let a sandworm take us. Like, where are we going? What is the point? And have that conversation. Like, they sort of touch on it a little bit. So when that fight at the end should be him making a decision to live. Of like, no, I am the Kwisatz Haderach, or I am going to be more.
Or at least I will survive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I will live with this violent, strange people who I'm scared of.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of talk about Leto's father, who died apparently gored by a bull, and so like when you see that bull's head
repeatedly, yes, I got that plenty of times.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of sort of ominous stuff that he's going to die, and he has a conversation with Lady Jessica about, you know, take care of Paul, and I mean, you know, in the novel it's much clearer that they know this is a trap, although that trap doesn't really make sense. I mean, it's one of these things.
I have questions about the trap, but
yeah, well, we can return to that. I do too, but you're right that, I mean, I think the movie has so many scenes in which it's setting up the sadness of losing Leto and losing your father, but then it just doesn't sort of deliver. It's very strange. It's like he's gone. You know, Timothée Chalamet looks depressed or looks down for 5 minutes, and then, you know, or 5 seconds, and then it's on to surviving. Like you said, there's no question of whether we're going to survive. And I think part of the problem is that this leans too heavily on the prophecy. And I think a little bit of the dreams, a little bit of that prophecy goes a long way. And I think that this, you know, you think, if we're only going to film half of this story, what is that story? How do we make that a complete story? I've suggested how to do it. It's a downward arc where, as you say, you know, it's I've lost everything. I was the heir apparent to this empire, and now basically that empire is destroyed, or at least the king is dead. All of our main guys are dead. We've effectively lost everything, and I am, you know, stranded in this murderous desert with these people who I don't understand. But, you know, that's the story. That's what should be the story of the first half, if you're going to make it feel like a complete story. It doesn't do that, and instead it leans so heavily on these dreams. Dreams in film never work.
No.
I mean, they're always either like Big Lebowski, just sort of like an excuse to do something totally whatever we want that's unrelated, or every horror movie where it's like, you know, oh, here's a really frightening idea. We can't do that in continuity, so make it a or it's like prophecy and important, and that stuff never works in film. And so, you know, it sort of has to lean into that to tell you, don't worry, the story cuts off, but we're going to gesture toward this other thing. But that other thing isn't defined. I don't know. None of that really works for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. No, the dream thing, or like you say, if you're going to do prophecy dreams, you have to be pointed. You have to be like, there's cryptic, right? You can be cryptic, but you have to be just cryptic enough that the audience is going to get it. And the repeated viewing of Zendaya again, fine. We all know she's in this film. She's all over the poster, right? And she will definitely be in part 2, right? She's a massive part of the story. But those repeated visions of her, just become a distraction. That at times, like the story, like literally stops for you to go, and now they're going to look at some mouse in a little hole, or like she's going to look beautiful against the sunset, and it's like fine, but that doesn't even pay off in this film.
Yeah.
Like, I get you've got to say that, but like him meeting her, and this was the problem, and I feel this is a Villeneuve issue. He is so anti-blockbuster in his sensibilities. I understand it, and I get it, that he doesn't want to give you too much of a rah-rah moment. So if you're going to give me those different visions and things, right, of Zendaya and all the other things, when he meets them at the end, it needs to be an oh shit moment.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not. It's really flat. Like, she just says, I wouldn't have let you kill my friends. And he's like, oh, all right. Like, he just goes, oh shit, you're there. All right, well, that's a surprise. There's nothing of like, it lingering on her face to be like, oh, this is who is this woman? That you're the woman I've been,
Yeah. Well, he sort of knows who she is, but you're right. I mean, I wanted him to just sort of like stare awkwardly, like, you're the woman I've been dreaming about. And the other thing is that this is more true in the Lynch version, but this sort of like, there's always the risk of like, is this a love story of like, I'm all alone in emo, but I dream of, this mystic, beautiful woman who I'm going to meet. And then he meets her, and it's like, again, no, you're right. It's flat. There's no reaction. It's
yeah, and I don't know, because that comes again with the ending, like you say, that fight and him winning the fight should feel like a tragic victory. Like it should feel. They even say it in the film that Paul Atreides has to die, and that from that the prophesied one will rise. The Kwisatz Haderach will rise from that. Okay, brilliant. But it's so subtle. Like, they try to show it you with like there's some whispering going on in the background as he sort of like he takes the fall and then he kills the guy, and then he's like, "We are now Fremen and we shall go on." It's like, yeah, but you need to have like, you either need to feel something for that moment. You either need to feel triumphant because he's come out of a tragedy and is now taking a step forward towards something great, or you need to feel it. You need to end this film and feel sorrow because he has broken away from something and is taking a step towards tragedy. It does not do that. It just goes, he stands up and kills someone. You're like, what are you trying to tell me with this ending? Like, is it good or is it bad? Should I dread part 2, or should I feel it's he doesn't want to commit to a trajectory, and it sort of bothers me.
I know what you're saying, and I think that like in Blade Runner 2049, I feel terrible about the death of his VR girlfriend. I mean, and that is not done as an, oh my God, this is sad. I mean, it's got the visually it's doing that, but it doesn't have a moment in which the main character breaks down and cries and looks at a photo of her and all those stereotypes. Villeneuve wants to avoid that stuff. And I don't mind ambiguity. I don't need to know whether I should be excited about the next one or not, if I should be dreading it. But I mean, that fight scene is so flat. And I think even the conflict with the heroic sacrifice and escaping this, water container sort of thing that has been built in the desert doesn't need to be there at all. That just goes on and it's very flat. And you think, why are we even watching this? And so by the time you get to that fight, it just feels like one more thing, one more fight scene. And I would be very happy if we were talking about the sense of like, I've lost everything. I don't know if I can go on. My dad's dead.
Yeah.
And I'm going into the desert to beg these violent, unknowable people to keep me and my mom alive. And now they won't even help me. They want to eat my mom,
Yeah.
and now a guy has challenged me to a fight that I don't know that I will win. And I don't even want to do this, but I've got to do this if my mom is going to survive and if I'm going to survive. Not that I necessarily, want to, but that it should be, like you say, I mean, it should be hard. There should be some emotion there. And instead, suddenly Paul is a ninja in that fight, which I get that he's had training before, but he's so absurdly good. And I don't know how to feel about this death. It's just like, okay, well, you're with us now. And it doesn't help that the last line that Paul says is the worst performed line by Timothy Chalamet, where he's like, if you'll have us. And he just looks so, I want to punch his face at that moment. And I like him.
There are several lines in this film, and they stand out because there's so much good in this film that when there's a blip, it seems to stand out massively, and that is one of them. I agree. The other one's the very end of the film is Zendaya when she's like, on to new beginnings and that sort of kind of thing. You're like, oh my god, like that's cheesy crap. Like you've done so well right up until that last minute. That fight though, this is the point. Like, and again, and this is my sensibility. So this may be on me, and I'm going to use a reference now that is so unrelated to Dune, but I have a point. That final fight, in fact, two fights in this, but that final fight where he's fighting that guy who challenges him. When I came out, I thought of Rocky, right, of a Rocky Balboa fight, and by that I mean there's a lot of times they'll shift in that fight, like Rocky 3. The point of the fight is the last fight of that against Clubber Lang. He knows that he has to get Mr. T angry. He has to get Clubber, because that's when he gets careless, and that's when he can take advantage, and that's how he wins the fight. Fine, you see that playing out, and there's an emotionality to that fight where he's sort of doing that. He's taking the hits, he's getting it all riled up, and I love that fight. Right? There's things like that happens in like the Rocky Balboa from 2006. Like they do something similar, and there's this thing of like. And I don't want him to go down on one arm, it to go black and white, and for Timothy Chalamet to see, Burgess Meredith being like, just one more round. I don't need that. Kid. Yeah, I don't need that. But at some point, he attempts 3 times to give the guy a chance to yield. He gets a blade to his throat or to one of his other arteries, and he's telling him, like, I could kill you. And it's not until Stilgar says, well, you've got to kill him, or this, one of you's got to die. And then the acceptance of that is so flat and so quick. He's like, oh, all right, bang. Like there should still be a reluctance there where he takes the hit, he goes down, gets back up, and does it. And I want that to be like this: the killing of this man, because they keep telling you repeatedly, he's never killed a person before. He's never killed a person before. All right, tell me then or show me that killing this person takes something from Paul. Like it should be a decision. Like there should be a moment of like, if I have to, I'm going to have to do this, but I don't want to. Like make it take a toll on him, but it doesn't. It just and what's so frustrating is like the whole film has been leading to these things, and I don't know if it's I think Denis Villeneuve has trouble with action. He's great on some of the scenes, but some of the action in this really falters. And the other one, I laughed. I was in the cinema and I chuckled at another scene when I completely wasn't supposed to. And I don't blame the actor because it's weird because I've seen him in other things. He's better. And it is Jason Momoa. His fight in that thing you're talking about, the water thing, where you find that they actually can cultivate plants and they're going to do terraforming. He only locks the doors and he gets trapped in that corridor, right? And he's fighting them, and this thing, and it's all fine. It's all very good standard stuff. Like they've clearly got a good fight for choreographer, whatever.
It's such a cliche, but here's the lock the door. I'll hold them off.
Yeah, hold the door.
Right.
It's literally it's total cliche. But he gets taken down, and then he gets up. and it's sort of like behind them, like some horror film. But the way he does it, I was like, Arnie would have done that in the 80s. Like, it feels so out of place and so big compared to everything else that's been going on. And again, going back to that thing, like, and then he's killed, but it doesn't feel like that first fight is taking any toll on him. So he just sort of goes at it again. And you're like, hang on, like, you don't know how to shoot action. This should be a real, that second blowout should be like a real effort. Like, he's really holding them off. Like, this should be his last ditch. Like, he knows he's going down, he's bleeding out. It should feel like something. And then, unfortunately, when his head hits the sand, I chuckled. I was like, pfft. Like, that was silly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's unfortunately that all I felt for that third act from that point on was like, this feels silly. You've lost me a little bit.
Yeah, I wouldn't go quite that far, but I feel the same way. And I feel like that's such a cliche in a movie that is avoiding cliches. To the point about the final fight with Paul and the Fremen dude, one of the things that the Lynch film does well is it uses Paul's narration to, even in places where it doesn't fit the novel, to sort of have him give his emotional response to something where he might be stoic, but he'll say, "My name is a killing word," like, and you have this like gut punch, kind of like people are killing in my name, literally, right?
Yeah.
Paul, that fight isn't hard enough for Paul. Paul doesn't win because he's underestimated. Because the whole point is he's not really the Messiah, right? I mean, this is a story we tell ourselves. Suddenly he's a ninja and he's totally stoic about everything. You don't have to use that line of narration to drive home the idea that he's underestimated and that's why he's able to win, which is just not the case. He's just superior. And also that our introduction to the Fremen, we're joining the Fremen and we're doing so by killing a guy who I have no reason to think he might be a little martial, a little, aggressive, but he isn't a bad guy. And the very first thing I'm doing is murdering somebody as I've escaped this carnage. And if you can't do that in narration, the reason we resort to narration is to drive those emotional points home that need to be told. If you want to avoid that, that's great. I applaud you. I have no doubt Denis Villeneuve wants to avoid that. So you need to communicate it visually. You need to communicate it in other ways, and none of that is communicated. I agree with you 100% about the Jason Momoa fight, but I would say that's part of what I don't understand about this movie. I mean, I do not for the life of me. I never have understood. I mean, I've looked forward to this movie. I do not understand $165 million to one of my favorite directors, but who just came off the bomb of Blade Runner 2049, and we're going to give him $165 million to direct the first half of Dune. Well, what if it fails? And then wouldn't it be better if we just directed the whole thing in Lord of the Rings style, just back to back? I know he wanted to do that. The studio said no. And kudos to Time Warner for giving him this amount of money and this amount of freedom. Kudos to them. Time Warner believes in directors in a way that Disney does not. I mean, that's wonderful. However, I still don't get this movie. I don't get, looking at the script, I would not say, let's throw $165 million at it. And your point about Jason Momoa, I don't understand what Dave Bautista is doing in this. I don't understand what Jason Momoa is doing in this. I don't understand Josh Brolin. I don't understand. I mean, Zendaya is going to be important to the next one, but her job in this is to look pretty against the desert, I mean, I don't understand why Jason Momoa is in this. And I'm not saying he's a horrible actor or anything. I don't understand why Dave Bautista is in this. They're not doing any of the things that they're, I mean, if you're like an Aquaman fan, you're like, all right, I'm going to go see Jason Momoa kick some ass.
You've just You've just answered your question. Why are these people in this film? I'll tell you why they're in this film. Because when they were casting it, someone's gone, right, you've got Timothy Chalamet, who's been doing indie films as your main character. You've got Rebecca Ferguson, who, whilst good, I think I don't think I've seen a performance I don't like her in. She's very good, but she's not a household name. You've got Oscar Isaacs for the Mums, coming in fine. He's a known actor. He's good, all fine. But we're still doing a sci-fi film, and I'm not hearing tentpole names. I'm not hearing. I can hear the executives are going like, well, you're right, okay. Well, I'm not hearing who's on the poster that they're going to go. I know that guy. All right, well, we're going to have Jason Momoa. You're done. Right, let's have Jason Momoa. He's going to be on the poster. You're about Zendaya. Right, that's for the kids. The kids like Zendaya. She's done, she's in Spider-Man. Right, great. Get her in. You know, and you say about Josh Brolin. I actually kind of like Josh Brolin. Like when he plays grumpy old man, like No Country for Old Men and things.
He's brilliant as George W. Bush.
Yes.
He's a solid actor.
Yeah. So the cast.
But what does he do in this movie?
Well, yeah. The thing is like Gurney's there for a purpose, isn't he? Like he's the old guard. He's supposed to be there, but like, I'm trying to sort of spoil this because I know things about the future of the books that I haven't read, but I just know through osmosis of other things. Like Gurney isn't dead.
Yeah.
And so he will be back, because you don't see him die, and so he's likely to come back. But I don't know. I like him as a presence. I kind of like Josh Brolin as a sort of a presence, and him and Oscar Isaac work well together on screen. The one, but Dave Bautista. Well, Dave Bautista's worked with Denis Villeneuve before. He's in Blade Runner 2049. Of all of them, of those sort of, if it's between him and Jason Momoa, I like Dave Bautista in this. He's him as the Beast, as the Harkonnen next to Stellan Skarsgård. Like scared, like terrifies me. Like he's awesome. Like he's huge. He looks massively intimidating. And then when he's there, like, basically like beheading soldiers and stuff and doing his bit, like, I'm like, oh yeah, you are, I take you, and I'm not taking out the film by going, that's Dave Bautista. Like, no, you are like a horror figure. Like, whenever the Harkonnens are in this, like, it leans into the horror, and like they creep me out, like proper creep me out. So yeah, no, I actually like Dave Bautista in this. Jason Momoa doesn't work for me in this film. He's fine, but I don't know. It just feels like Jason Momoa in a Dune film.
Yeah, I mean, Stellan Skarsgård, as Harkonnen, is under so much makeup.
Yeah.
But my problem. I mean, I like Brolin. I agree with everything you're saying about Dave Bautista. And I'm not against any of these actors per se. I think Brolin is the one who I've enjoyed the most previously, but I'm not against any of these actors, but it seems like they have nothing to do. I mean, Josh Brolin plays Gurney. Gurney and Paul's relationship is much more defined in the David Lynch movie. You had 2.5 hours to shoot half of this plot, and he's just like, it's like, how do I distinguish him from the Jason Momoa Duncan character? I mean, what's the difference? I mean, literally, they could swap out for the training sequence. So, I mean, you're told like, hey boyo, but you don't feel any kind of connection to them. I feel like Dave Bautista, you're right. I mean, his job is basically to look horrible, to look like that creature, and he does, and that's great. Kudos to you. But none of them are doing. You said, okay, it's casting, but I mean, it's anyone who's like, I like my action movies drained of all common sense and any emotional connection, and as stupid as human beings can possibly make. In other words, I like Aquaman, and I want to see more of that. So I'm gonna go see this weird, Denis Villeneuve $165 million spectacle of rolling dunes and ideas about the Messiah. And how is there an overlap in that audience? And if there isn't an overlap, then you just have to say it doesn't make sense to do a $165 million Dune because that's just not the same movie as Jason Momoa movie.
But that's not how business. That's not how marketing works. So let's be perfectly clear. This was made by Warner Brothers. It's on HBO Max, which is the same streaming as Aquaman and Justice League and all that stuff, like Jason Momoa's other stuff. What this film has done when they've done this, like if you look at the trailers, right, the trailers do not say to you weird sci-fi, and forget that, and nobody, all right, who's watched under the age of 25 has watched 1984 Dune before watching this. Right, so there's no association. There's probably more people have bought the book after to try and understand certain things than before. All they've gone is, it's a sci-fi film. It's got there's some explosions in it. It's got a cast I like. I'm gonna go see it, or I'm gonna watch it on HBO Max.
And Hans Zimmer bassy score.
Hans Zimmer's doing the score. Denis Villeneuve has done Blade Runner. They're trying to badge him as the next, or as a sort of Christopher Nolan type. That's what they're trying to do. And so, I mean, that's why Warner Brothers courted Christopher Nolan, because they want these two directors. They're looking to badge names. They want big name directors, and the hope is anybody that goes in this wanting to see a Jason Momoa movie or an action movie enjoys it for what it is and comes back for part 2.
Yeah, I mean, look, I accept that marketing is about deceiving, right?
Yes.
I mean, the goal is to get somebody in the audience and then hope that they like it. And if you've sold it as X and it's really Y, I mean, to some degree, that's inevitable. But that is a problem when, I mean, so often we look at movies that failed. And one of the reasons they failed is because it was sold as Y when it's really X. And that's not a problem if, it's an action comedy and the trailers make it seem a little more action heavy than it really is. We all know that's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
That's fine. But if you're selling a comedy as an action movie or vice versa, that's when you start getting into trouble and people are going to see one thing and what they're getting is another, and then word of mouth is really bad. This is definitely in that territory where, these kinds of casting and like you point out, the trailer, that just does not belong in the kind of movie that this is, and that this wants to be. Everything that's good about this is the stuff that is the mystical, just sort of like Zendaya narrating over shots of dunes, and like Denis Villeneuve could remake Koyaanisqatsi with the Dune characters. I'm totally down, right? I mean, but you can do that for $20 million, and you don't need Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista, and you know what I'm saying.
I agree. I totally agree. I think they are, and I think that's the thing, is they're there for a purpose, and the purpose isn't always the script. They're there for another purpose. The thing is, I think as Duncan Idaho, he's fine. I think there are other actors I can't think of off the top of it, but there are other actors I think would have been better cast. But it is what it is.
Well, we hate his death sequence, and that's got to be there because that's the Jason Momoa scene.
Yeah. But you need someone who can fight and look, intimidating. He's got to be he's almost got to be the counter to the other reason is, like I say, if you've got Dave Bautista on the Harkonnen side, you need to have someone of similar size and attributes on the good side. They never face off. That's never going to happen. But you need that equivalency. One of the things you say, one of the things you say about the weirdness of this film and what it is, and what are these actors doing? I think that this film's relatively emotionless throughout. There's a couple of scenes and they make it the trailer, the bit where like the bit where Duke Leto says to Paul, I kind of like that the graveyard where he talks about his father, and he says, like, if you don't, you will still be the only thing I ever wanted you to be, my son. And it's delivered well. It's delivered with sincerity. And there's a couple of scenes between Oscar Isaacs and Rebecca Ferguson, sort of, Leto and Lady Jessica, that really do feel sincere. They do feel like a couple that trusts each other, and they've had a complicated relationship, but they've got this trust and I don't know about love, but there's definitely something there. And I feel that there are connections between these people, but they're just not very well explored, and there just seems a lack of emotionality, and it gets less as the film goes on. And that sort of is the place that's taken place or replaced by visuals. Because we'll get onto that. This film is one of the best looking films. Like there are scenes in this film that are just so well shot. The whole scene when the Atreides receive the whatever it is, the deed, I suppose, for Arrakis. When the planet that ship comes down and
the Emperor's Proclamation, right?
Yeah.
And that's the only time you ever see the Guild, the Space Guild, right?
Yeah, and all that's really good. When the Bene Gesserit visit Lady Jessica at night, and that you got that ship, and that's all so well lit. And then there's like scenes on Arrakis and stuff, and it's just incredibly well shot. There are scenes in this that are phenomenal. Like you would have them like if you captured them as a screenshot, that they're just a piece of art. They're so well done.
Amen.
And he does that beautifully. And it is striking, but again, like it doesn't, for me, fully replace not my investment in the story. And I start to feel that. I mean, I think I carried for, like you said, about 20 minutes, half an hour, and that was the same for me. And then I started to be a little bit like, this is good. I'm really enjoying it, and I'm loving some of like the fact they're getting some of the technicalities and they're doing stuff. But another scene, I felt like I'm ripping on this film, but like the other scene that I felt was interesting, but again I had to sort of like stop myself and consider it. When they go out in their those sort of dragonfly ships, and by the way, like you said about the designs, I absolutely love the design of those ships. They're fantastic, and to see them started up and the wings are going and they start the noise, brilliant, absolutely fantastic. I loved seeing them every time. But they go out and they go to that like tanker, the trawler thing that's picking up the spice, and they've got the sandworm coming towards them, and it starts off, and I love the fact that they're doing it over a radio. So you've got this sort of like this radio communication going on in the background. And they've got like the worm spotters, and you've got the guys going like, yeah, it's coming in. You've got to move. And it's this conversation. It feels so workmanlike that I was like, that's awesome. I'm really liking that. That's a great touch. And then it gets closer and things start to go wrong. Like the clamp goes. And again, I'm into this territory. I'm like, this should feel heart pounding. Like, I should feel like someone's in trouble. I need to feel like there's some real stakes here. Someone's going to die. And they go out and they're doing the rescue, and they're saying, like, Leto showing how he cares about the people more than the spice, which is good. Oscar Isaac comes off well, and then Gurney and Paul come off, and then Paul's hit by the spice, and it gives him that whole vision, and it just sort of stops, and you've got this vision thing going on, and then he's sort of saved, but at no point do I ever sort of feel like, oh, there's a worm coming. This thing could potentially, kill the. It never feels like there's tension. There's no tension in that scene. It sort of pretends like there is, but it's not like like there are films that I don't know. It just fell flat again. Not so much flat. I like what's going on because you're learning information. I'm liking people's performances, but I'm like, shouldn't this feel like a shark's about to come up and kill this person? Shouldn't this feel like Tremors has better sort of tension for these moments than this does? Like, the music's sort of doing it, but the cast just aren't. I don't know. I don't really feel like it just felt that scene to me just sort of like, okay, I get what it's doing, but like.
I mean, I agree with you completely, and I feel as if I also find like Paul just kind of like stands by the side of the spice mining craft, and I know he's got spice in the system or whatever, but he seems like so self-indulgent.
Mm.
And he's endangering himself and other characters, but again, you don't feel that tension. I mean, and I come away from scenes and I think, all right, what was this scene about? When you're a screenwriter, you make sure, traditionally you try to make sure that every scene is doing multiple things, right? It's it's moving the plot forward, but it's also establishing like a relationship and we need to make sure that's established because it's going to be important later. What, you were saying like, well, this is, we get to see the sandworm, we get to see that Leto is a good guy. I mean, that's can be handled very quickly.
Mm.
I don't know that that's worth all of that time, and I'm not awed by the spectacle of it. And as you say, there isn't really a lot of tension. You said that, this, I was talking about Denis Villeneuve and how beautiful everything is. I think, amen, absolutely. But what's interesting to me is that, I mean, and Nolan sometimes gets pegged for not having a heart, not having, that's too cold and intellectual. I think you're right that this movie feels that way. It feels strangely flat. But what's interesting to me is that the stuff that works the best is totally flat. It's the opening. It's the sort of, esoteric, mystical sort of, I don't know what's going on, but I'm being introduced to a concept or some characters, but it's just really relishing those visuals, and you're watching a spaceship take off and you're just like, or spaceship coming into a hangar and you're like, that's an amazing design. Who's on this spaceship? And it lets itself languish in that sort of lavish visuals and the ideas and slowly building this universe. And I found myself, especially watching it the second time, thinking this would almost be better if it were shot as like a series of short stories where you have like, okay, here's the Bene Gesserit scene, where you have, I mean, you don't need to have the sort of Tarantino on screen, like chapter 4, the Bene Gesserit, you don't need to do that, but you can sort of like cut to black and you can give the audience some indication of like, all right, we're not moving the plot forward. We're establishing the Bene Gesserit. We're laying this idea of the Messiah in there, and how the mother is going to get it. And instead, it feels like one thing after another, where even by that point, I'm like, why is this all happening at the same time? Why? It's like, why, we've never had a conversation about your decision to have a son before. Now that you're going to Arrakis, we're going to do this. And so it just, by the time you're on that scene there, you're talking about saving the spice from the sandworm, I'm ironically, by focusing on the narrative so much, and I'm pulled out of the narrative and I don't care anymore about those characters or the plot or I mean, this isn't important, this spice mining particular thing. And I get it. Leto's a good guy and Paul's kind of lost in his head. Like, is that really what I'm supposed to take from that whole scene? It's a long scene.
It is. And, I don't know, if I'm honest. I think, because here's the thing. You're supposed to say that, Duke Leto's a good guy. But you only get that because, and you've already been shown that because he's already said his intentions. Now they're just trying to put it into practice. Fine. I'm happy with that, But again, it's the way it's shot. And again, maybe it's because I'm expecting certain cliches or certain, certain sensibilities. But like when they get back on and he saves all those people, right? Think of it like Black Hawk Down or some other sort of like military thing where they're coming in and it's the last minute and like the helicopter's just hovering, like we can't land, we've jump on board kind of thing, There's got to be some sort of like desperate tension. They get back onto the little dragonfly thing and then like they're like, where's Paul? And it cuts back to Paul, dicking around by the trawler thing. And fine, like you say, he's obviously infected by the spice, and it shows that. And again, like I'm quite comfortable that like he's completely out of it, like he's high, like this is the first time he's ingested spice, and it's blown him out of the water. And then all of a sudden, like a hand grabs him, and it's Gurney pulling him back. And I'm like, okay, this clearly wasn't a tough decision. But you've said about the relationship between Gurney and Paul. Like, it should be a moment where, you know, there should be a look between like Leto and Gurney, when Gurney's like, yeah, no, look, I'll go. Like, this is not a problem. Like, he's just as much as a son to me as he is to you, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he runs out regardless, and then drags him back. But then when they do fall and the sands start to shimmer, and again, I like that they're sinking in. I love the idea. It shows how the planet works. Like, this is what the worms do. And then they're running. But it never sort of like feels like this. It just, I don't know. It feels a bit like you could have done that by throwing a rock at his head from a distance. You know, just bring him around. Like, I need to see something where it's Gurney's under pressure, like dragging him. Like, he's still not in his senses. He's having to carry him. He's having to do something. Like, it should feel like there's almost a self-sacrifice to save him, but. Or it's a sort of a bonding moment where it's like, you know, right, you know, you saved me, now I get to save you, old man. It's cliche, but like, there's just nothing in that scene. And then they come back, and all Leto says to him is like, "You're important. You don't do that again." He goes, "All right, sorry." Like, it just never feels like it never reaches the peaks of emotional drama that I'm looking for. Now, I'm not talking about soap opera. I don't want. But you need some fire in some of this, and it never, like, you know, the scenes with the Atreides never feels like there's fire. It never feels like there's real conflict in any of this.
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with you 100%, and that's a scene that should be like, you know, if that's a short story, that's an extended short story, right? I mean, it's an interlude. It's not the main plot. It's an interlude that is, okay, here is the planet's dangerous. Paul's gonna encounter spice for the first time. We should see that relationship between Gurney and Paul, where, you know, we're going to show Leto's a good guy. He actually cares about people. You know, all of that stuff is happening, but because it's not communicated emotionally, and it doesn't have to be those cliched lines, it can be a look. So often an actor is capable of communicating that with a look, or you know, Gurney rushing out, the look of concern of, you know, I mean, we don't get any of that. And so Paul comes off as, you know, like, I don't know, some like self-indulgent emo kid.
He's spoiled. Yeah, he's spoiled.
Yeah, I mean,
Paul,
none of that scene doesn't work.
No, and this is the thing. Like, if you're going to have Paul come across as spoiled, that's fine. Have him become that sort of, like, you know, next generation of spoiled royalty. But then have that play out in the finale. That should, if that's who you're setting up in the first part of your film, in the first third of your film, the first half of your film, that invasion by the Harkonnen, that attack and that loss should feel even greater. Because now he's forced to live in the desert. It should feel absolutely destroying him, but he just sort of like goes along with it.
Dad's dead. I guess we have to live in the desert, you know. I mean, there's that nice scene with Lady Jessica in that tent before they pull themselves out, and, you know, it's like, oh, conserve you. Well, here's another thing. They're always talking about, like, conserve your moisture, but you see them, you know, it's like, you're not in a still suit. You don't have a mask. You're wasting moisture constantly, you know, because in order to get the actors' faces and all of this. I mean,
I did like talking about the tent, though. Sorry, I did like the idea of the tent, that the tent was a version of the still suit, and there's a netting inside it that's absorbing the moisture. That was really cool. That's cool,
but where's that moisture going? You know, I mean, where is that being collected? Is moisture evaporating in that tent that's being, you know, so it's being collected? So I don't know. I mean, that's okay. I still like the tent scene. I like all that. But, you know, they just come out, and, you know, what you're talking about is sort of like communicating the stakes, communicating the emotion of the scene. It's like we watch this stuff, and then we're left with sort of like these bullet points, like, oh, it's a dangerous planet, you know, and you're left at just kind of like, you kind of know that abstractly. I mean, but you don't feel it. You don't feel invested. And that last half an hour or 45 minutes even, I feel like is, okay, We don't want them to just land and run away from a sandworm and be with a Fremen. It's got to be more dramatic than that, and this is the climax, because we, had the attack happen halfway through. Literally, it's right at the halfway point where the attack happens. That's not the climax. So now it's really got to be a hardship to get them through the desert and to the Fremen. So then this happens. So then that happens. But none of it works. And I'm left with sort of like, I don't know if it's as a viewer or as a writer, it's like I checked that box. I get it. It was a hard journey,
It
but I
wasn't.
don't feel anything.
It wasn't a hard journey. Like they're going through the desert. There's something else. You talk about actors and looks. I want to ask a question in a minute, but that thing, one of the things that they do, which is interesting, is that they say you can't walk normally in the desert because the repeated sort of motion attracts the worms. So there's this sort of like the motion of the desert movement, like a little dance to get you across the desert. And the problem is they introduce it in a video which is done as a sort of like a hologram, and then I reckon there's more of this on the cutting room floor because it keeps popping up in the way they move, but it looks so stupid on film that you go, yeah, they've clearly cut that back, right?
Yeah.
But at no point do you feel like it's a journey. And again, I know I'm going to make stupid comparisons, but even like Lord of the Rings, they had wonderful sort of vistas and landscapes in that thing because they filmed in the mountains of New Zealand, and so they had helicopter shots and drone shots and sort of like, look how far they've got to walk, look how big this is, but it never feels that big in the desert. Like there's never sort of any. It's always all the shots are either close up, like mid-range close-ups, or full body. There's no like massive distance shots of them as like little specks and going like they're just in this open desert. Like it should feel like an expanse, and it never really does.
I think it feels like it's expansive to me. I mean, but like when Paul and Lady Jessica come out of that tent, it's sort of like, okay, well, where are we? We got to get to the Fremen, And you're right about the walking. Like there are clearly times where they're creating rhythmic sounds that would attract the sandworms. They don't really follow through. I can deal with the look of that. I mean, I did read a review that said it looks like the Ministry of Silly Walks from Python.
There's a little.
It doesn't for me. It looks like they're doing like the moonwalk from Michael Jackson or something. But I'm fine with that. But I mean, like Lord of the Rings, all of those three movies, there's no sense of journey for me whatsoever. It's just X happened, then Y happened, then Z happened. None of that's important. None of it's really imaginative or smart. But what it does really well is at the end of every one of those episodes, the characters sit down and whine and mope for 30 minutes. And so they talk about how this is a journey and it's hard, but we got to get the ring to Sora, and they have these things where they say, this is hard. And you get the sense of like, okay, even if I'm not invested in that dumb episode there, at least I know this is hard for these characters and this is a journey that is difficult.
It's taking a toll. It needs to feel like it's taking a toll on them, and it never does.
But that's the communication of just the characters have emotion, and I don't need the characters to sit down for 30 minutes at the end of confronting yet another dumb, obstacle that has no importance. But I do need the characters going through the desert. It's like you just came out of a tent. Dad's dead. We have nothing. There's no home to go back to. We have to find these Fremen if we're going to survive. Stop crying about Dad and get yourself to the Fremen because I promised him I'd take care of you. She never says that.
No, there's none of that. It never feels like it matters. But one of the things you talked about actors and looks, and there's a few of them in this. There's a few times where, like, because these are some very good actors. There's some Oscar nominees and all other stuff in this, right? One of the ones I find the most weird and really took me by surprise, or at least sort of maybe take us a bit of a step back. So they come out of that tent and they've both got a still suit. They've got the packs, and they get up to like a rock surface, and they start getting changed. And there's a notion of like, oh, we're going to have to get naked because we're going to have to get dressed. There's this weird look between mother and son, and it's like that. I don't know what that's supposed to convey. It looks really awkward because you just go, well, I'll just turn around and I'm gonna get my suit on. But there's this weird look of like, I don't know. I didn't know what to think of it. It was just weird.
It is clearly an incestuous relationship. It is much more. That's much more apparent in the novel.
Yeah.
That moment made less of an impression on me than the moment when Paul has this vision and he goes to her and he's sort of like kneeling as he says, like, "You're pregnant."
Mm.
And she says, "How could you know that?" And there's such a intimacy there. I mean, it is the intimacy of lovers. It is absolutely not the intimacy of a mother and a son. Yeah, I think that is clearly there.
Yeah. Okay, good. It wasn't just me. I just thought
You're
maybe
not the pervert. Those cards definitely show some mother-son effing.
Okay, that's fine. I was like, maybe I've been watching, I've been watching the wrong videos on Pornhub, and I've just now got this thing on my head. I don't know. Yeah, that's fine.
It's popular.
Yes. The other thing was, you mentioned it very early on, is the trap, and we said we'll get back to it. So the trap. I want to walk through this because I haven't read the book for a long time, so I know it's coming, but I can't remember. So the Harkonnen are being made by the Emperor to hand over power of Arrakis to the Atreides.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then when they get there, they've taken all the equipment, so it's not going to work. Spice supply is going to be damaged. Blah blah blah. And so the Emperor backs using sort of secret forces that he keeps stashed away somewhere. Those guys in the white suits with the swords.
The Sadukar, yeah.
Yeah.
The Emperor has his own army that you see very briefly.
Yeah. He then supports the Harkonnen to re-invade Arrakis and kill the Atreides.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I don't understand what is the trap for? Like, what is the end goal of killing off the Atreides? Are they a threat? Is it because of this prophecy that does the Emperor know that Paul Atreides could be the Kwisatz Haderach and therefore a threat to the Emperor? It's not in the film, and I'm never entirely sure if it's in the novel, so I couldn't remember.
Yeah, I mean I don't remember that aspect. I mean, the weird thing is that the Emperor Shaddam IV is weak emperor, and the Bene Gesserit have been manipulating him behind the scenes, and clearly he's comfortable with the Harkonnen. They call him Harkonnen here.
Yeah.
Which throws me off every time I hear it. But so yeah, I mean, I think the idea is that the House Atreides is on the rise. It's now a threat to the Harkonnen and then also potentially to the Emperor. But it's like, okay, so the Bene Gesserit are outside of Lady Jessica. They're not invested in the survival of House Atreides. This is a way of sort of like eliminating a rival. And I guess the Bene Gesserit have to be in on it because they're manipulating the Emperor, although we don't really see all of this. I mean, my problem in the movie is this and I guess it's true in the novel too, is this the best way of getting rid of, all right, well, we have there's one planet in the entire universe that has a dilithium crystal mine. None of our starships can function without it. We're going to give it to the Romulans so that then we can attack and destroy the Romulans. That doesn't seem the most efficient way of doing that. And I know the point is like, okay, well, Paul's going to be there, Leto's going to be there. They're not going to have time to really put good defenses up. But still, you're disrupting the production even more. In the novel, it's clear that they have hoarded spice and that the market is going to rise as as the planet mining is disrupted. And that's not here in the movie. But even that, it's like, you could just hold that shit back, right? You're OPEC and one guy, just hold that shit back.
That was, cause it is sort of in the film. There's a drop line later on where Duke Harkonnen says, "We are now back where we're supposed to be. We've got control, and we've actually got the full stock in reserve, and we can now control the price increase." Like they literally talk about that for a very brief second. I'm like, okay, cool. That's your motivation, but like you say, you could have done that on the planet anyway. But one of the problems I had with this plan is this film actually presents you with a better alternative to what could have happened. When the attack happens and they take Leto prisoner, the doctor that betrayed him gives him a tooth full of some gas. And so he puts it in, he says, if you bite down on this, it'll kill you, but it'll also kill everybody around you, sort of thing. So he does that, and it kills like a lot of people to the extent of like some others have to come in like hazmat suits, and they find Lord Harkonnen up on the Baron Harkonnen up on the ceiling. So why didn't they send a spy? They even try it in the film. Like the Harkonnen leave a guy in a wall, and they've got the little mini dragonfly things with the that can get through the shield. Like a little pin. There are other ways of doing this where you could go. Well, you could just send someone to Caladan and like whilst they're having dinner as a guest, kill them off with a gas. Like it presents you with a better alternative in the film. And that's a real problem because you just go, well, this plan's stupid then. How much did this cost as well? Because there must be a cost for movie. Like Lord Harkonnen, the Baron Harkonnen must be going like, so I've got to pay. Because they also say there's a great point in this where they ask the guy whose eyes roll back in his head because he uses spice to do calculations. How much does it cost? How much does it cost them to come and deliver the deed or whatever, the declaration? And he makes the calculation. So then they're thinking, so there's a cost to space travel. So how much does it cost the Harkonnens then to gather all their stuff up and leave to then come back and invade and go to war? Like,
yeah, I mean, Dune has this central problem, which is that I love all of these themes. What I love about it are the visuals of the movie. I mean, I love the ideas. I love some of the language, the poetry of it. I mean, I don't especially enjoy, reading Herbert's novels, but I love in the films this sort of poetry, the visual poetry and the themes and all of this. But, as you explain more and more, the problem with the Lynch film is that nothing is explained and you can't possibly explain this complex universe in, a 10-second monologue. There's no way to do it. This movie sort of does it over the course of an hour in one scene after another. Curiously, it avoids the, Irulan sort of, history text for the most part. But, if that is the stuff that works for me, Dune has the central problem where the more you explain it, the more totally absurd and nonsensical it really is.
Yeah.
And there's so much stuff that, I mean, like you mentioned this calculator guy. I mean, that's a really cool concept, right? Like the idea is that there's been the Butlerian Crusade and, AI has been a problem. And so we sort of like Battlestar Galactica, right? This is an excuse to de-technology, to lower the level of technology so that you can't be AIs, right? So there are no robots, no androids, nothing like that. But this guy, we're able to have this sort of like medieval class of people who can do this. Okay, that's cool. I want the short film about that. Give me 10 minutes or 5 minutes of just Denis Villeneuve doing ideas about that dude and this whole class of people. Like, that's fascinating to me. I want that. The more you explain stuff and the more the irony is the more that you get into this and it becomes more than that and you actually have to understand the plot or understand the universe. It's really rather silly stuff. I mean, I'm going to get crucified for saying that, but
no, I agree. Because I think one of the comparisons I sort of felt watching this was Game of Thrones. And I actually thought, I was thinking, when that attack comes, when the Harkonnens attack Arrakis, I was like, this would be the end of a good season. Like, there's a great shot at the end of this film. Not the end. Well, it's not the end, but after that, they've escaped and they come out of the flying dragonfly thing, and they run up a dune and they look back and there's the burning city in the distance.
Yeah.
That's the end shot of season 1. Like, you're leaving them stranded in the desert on their lowest point, and you're going like, "Oh Christ, I've got to come back for season 2. Like, what's going to happen?" And then your first half is like the first 2 episodes is them, searching for and finding the Fremen, and then having to deal with that. That's all I could think about. Is like, and that if you were to do like a 10-hour, right, 10 episodes, an hour each, leading up to that moment, and all you had to deal with is all that stuff. Like, you could explore all this kind of stuff. You could explore the characters. You could provide further explanation as to why they had to do this plan. Well, we've got to do this plan because there are other families, and if we do it, if we just kill them off, it's too direct. That causes tension and sort of like will cause civil war, which they sort of address a little bit. But like, okay, so there needs to be, then we need to engineer a situation that feels like we have to intervene. So we've given them Arrakis to the Atreides, and they have failed, but then they don't want to give it back. So we're now going to send the Harkonnen in to retake it. Like, you could do all this.
I mean, two things about what you've just said. One is the sort of inescapable feeling watching this that this would have been better as an HBO miniseries, right?
Yes.
That it needs more room to breathe. And even if it takes some liberties and goes into, I mean, look, there are so many books to draw upon. There's tons of stuff that you can do. Even if it, do a 10 episode first season, you could do all of that stuff. You wouldn't feel as much time pressure. I mean, the other thing is, so that's point one. I mean, it's a bad sign when you spent $165 million to film half of a freaking book, and it's filled with all of the talent in the world. Amazing people who you and I respect the hell out of. And you come out of it thinking, yeah, I kind of wish that were a miniseries,
Yeah.
Like, I wish they had just done this for a lower budget or, same budget stretched across 12 hours or something on HBO. That's a bad sign. And I hate to say it, but the second thing gets back to my point about having a narrative structure to the first half, that it's not just the first half and stop. You've got to give it some sort of narrative structure. And that look back at the burning city, you're right. I mean, that strikes me too, as that is the end of the climax, right?
Yes.
And what I would say is in a 10 episode first season that does this, the first half of Dune, that needs to be the end of episode 9, where you say, "Oh my God, what's happened?" And then episode 10 is getting to the Fremen, and like, that's the end of your downward arc, right? Where there's nothing left to go back to. I mean, this movie needs to do that, where you see the burning city, and then the goal needs to be, how do we get them to the Fremen and get to that same point at the end of this movie with 10 minutes? Or, how do we just make that feel like it's the denouement to this action? And instead, you have the climax in the middle of the film. I don't really feel like it's a great fight. You see a lot of dropping of bombs and burning of buildings and, armies kind of fighting each other, but I don't have a sense of stakes the way I want to. That needs to be the climax. Skip all of the stuff with the water, horde and, and Jason Momoa sacrificing himself. And, I mean, if you have to cut the fight with the Fremen, but get everything after that shot of the city burning, fade to black. Everything else is a 10-minute denouement. And then you'll have more time for these characters and really exploring this stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I agree. Yeah. That's exactly what it should be. Like, that I thought that was the climax, or they escape, that, they go through the sandstorm and, that thing of Paul and Lady Jessica escaping and all that kind of stuff. Like, and then they climb up and they see that burning thing. Like, I was like, okay, this is it. We're coming to the end. And then, like I say, it doesn't. But because it's sort of like, it's like as you say, it's like a sideways transition. Instead of being a decline, instead of being that fall from grace or that fall to that bottom moment for them to climb back from, it never feels like that. It just feels like a sideways transition. Well, we lived in this city and now we're going to live in the desert. Roo-ha-ha, carry on. and that's sort of the problem, I think. But that comes from the coldness of this film, this lack of emotion. And
Well, and
yeah,
also the structure. I mean, you know, I'm all for breaking up narrative structure and new kinds of narrative, and throw the 3-act structure out. Okay, that's fine. I'm all for that if it works. But our reaction to the shot of the burning city is, this feels like the climax, and then everything after it just feels like one thing after another. The audience is conditioned to react a certain way, and when you have two additional whole arcs, little acts after that, the audience sort of has to conclude, and they if you know the book at all, you're like, okay, well, they got to get to the Fremen, right? Know where this story's going to end, but we got to resolve this bullshit we're watching right now before we really start getting up to the Fremen. And I'm just thinking, yeah, none of this is working for me. And I'm watching the clock now.
And that's the thing, I'm watching the clock. That's the important thing. It's like, because I'm now going like, okay, well, the ending's coming, it's sort of, if I get this on, and I will get this on Blu, we'll get to the final thoughts of it because we have Slate on it, but like, if I watch this again, or I get this on Blu-ray or whatever, and I have it on home media, there will be a point where I'm like, that final act, or that final section, like, there's a whole section of that where I'm like, I'm going to fast forward through this. Like, I'm going to go from this point to this point, and I'm going to get to them meeting the Fremen and having that fight, just so I can see it and get to the end of the film. Because there is nothing in that section that gives me anything, narratively, emotionally, adrenaline. There's nothing there to tell me. The only thing is they introduce the worm. You get to see that moment with the massive sandworm when it comes up, sort of like, sniffs him like a puppy and then buggers off. Like, all right, you get that. So you're seeing that he's got an affinity with the planet, or are you? Like, you see, it's it's a great shot. It was in the trailer, but it doesn't tell me a whole hell of a lot in the grand scheme of things, because I'm too busy going, well, hopefully this is leading to something big, because I've already had this big explosion-y bit.
And then another one, and then another one. One of the things I really, 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 really hate is the like multiple climax that we get in like actioners now. And I don't mind it if it's done well, right? Like we killed the demon, but there was this other problem. Okay, you can do it well. I like the denouement. I mean, everything's about that. But and if that has more conflict, that's fine. But it's this sort of like, oh, okay, another fighty climax with Jason Momoa after what I feel like is the main climax. Okay, gotta fight the Fremen, dude. Like, I mean, it's not sold well. And that scene with the sandworm. I mean, I'm a big fan of Dune. I want to see that sandworm. I mean, that's the money shot, man. And by the time you show me the sandworm, that sounds so perverted. By the time you show me the sandworm, I'm like, yeah, that's a sandworm.
Yeah.
I guess this is finally going to end soon. I've been so out of the narrative for so long that I'm like, yeah, I could have done without that.
Yeah, the thing about the fighting though is you can have that climax in the middle, or like later in the towards the second half. And again, it's mainly bombs dropping. There's no actual fighting. There's very little in the way of fighting. There's a little bit, but it's mainly bombs dropping. And
yeah,
it's inside. You see Jason Momoa sort of takes on those people, and there's bits and pieces, but it's not like a pitched battle, is it? Like you see Gurney run into battle, and you see a little bit, and then it cuts away to the sort of the inside. And I'm fine with that, because again, I kind of like that. I'm like, okay, cool. You're going to focus on specific bits. It's got multiple. This isn't just happening in one place. It's going on throughout the city or throughout the building. I'm digging that. All that stuff's actually kind of good. I was thinking of things like Black Hawk Down, or sort of like 13 Hours, or those sorts of films. I'm like, okay, you've sort of tapping into this sort of military kind of movie. I'm okay with that. It's looking good. But then, like I say, if you're going to do these other things, you need to be able to present a fight not just choreography, like you say, because the fight choreography and this is a problem at the moment, I think, with a lot of films. But fight choreography, it needs to be good, it needs to be solid, but it needs to have stakes, it needs to have a purpose, it needs to tell a story. One of the things, and this is another weird analogy, when I used to do wrestling many years ago when my knees worked, one of the things, and that was all we were, as well as all the moves, one of the things we were always beaten into was every match has to tell a story. Doesn't matter who wins, doesn't matter what you do in the match, you've got to tell a story. Like, if you go out and the crowd doesn't like the good guy, then the bad guy don't work. And if the crowd don't like the bad guy, if they don't dislike the bad guy, then the good guy don't work. Like, you've got to play it up and you've got to tell a story. Like, is it big guy versus little guy? Is this match is it a grudge match? Is this going to lead to something? Is one of them injured and the bad guy's going to play on that? Is it going to be that kind of thing? Is it going to be campy? Is it going to be this one? You always had to have that in mind of like, this is, otherwise it's just moves.
Mm-hmm.
It's just moves. Those moves have to tell you something, or they have to be leading to something. You have to feel tension from doing so. And I feel that like fight choreography in films at the moment has got to a point where the moves are amazing. Like, some of the athleticism in fights and stuff in modern action films is incredible. And the bar's been set incredibly high. You see these things of martial arts coming in, or just sort of like really cool, well choreographed fights. Excellent. But sometimes I think the focus is so much on the moves that they lose the storytelling. And I feel like if you ever watch a Jackie Chan film from sort of like back in the day, he knew it. Like, and Bruce Lee got this as well. Those martial arts guys, they knew it. Like, you couldn't just go through and beat everybody up. You had to take a punch. You had to do this. You had to do that. You had to, you were talking about the narrative arc. Like, every fight has a mini narrative arc. And one of the problems is the fights that should, that final fight and that corridor fight with Momoa, there is a narrative to tell there. There's a story to tell. And to go the full distance, supposed to go the other way, the cliched way. It's that thing of like being cut multiple times. Sort of like, Momoa's he's got like 12 knives in his back, and he's got like, he's bleeding out, but he's still last man standing. He's still there. That kind of, that's the extreme.
Mm-hmm.
But you need that narrative. Otherwise, it's because this film is just moves. And those fights are just moves. They are impressive moves, don't get me wrong, hugely well choreographed. And I'd say the action's averagely shot, but it lacks narrative. Like, they don't tell, if they're not going to tell me, if they're not going to give me through exposition, as you said, then they need to show it me through the actors. And I think there's some real major beats missing that could have made that last act really hit home. About loss and about fighting back, that sort of like that upswing, as you say. And I just think it's a real, that's where I sort of feel the most bored.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strange thing to feel bored at a $165 million movie that looks beautiful beyond belief. And yet, I totally understand. I mean, you're right about sort of narrative and fights telling a story. I mean, like, okay, I'm sacrificing myself for you. Sure, fine. I mean, but make us feel it. I mean, it's that final fight with the Fremen. I mean, it's a one-on-one. There's a decline from the fight in the city to, the Jason Momoa fight to fighting one dude. You've got to sell that. I mean, I'm killing somebody. I've got to kill to save my mom and stay alive and all of this. I mean, it, doesn't, I mean, narrative isn't about one thing after another happening. It's about what it means and why should we care. And I think that, I mean, you look at like Blade Runner 2049, and the narrative is a mess. I mean, the narrative has so much going on. It does not follow traditional structure. But for the most part, it works. And all those little narrative cul-de-sacs are fascinating and interesting. but they're fascinating and interesting almost because they don't have to tell a story. They don't have to hit the traditional notes. And you can sort of really take your time and feel them out. This sort of starts great. I mean, I'm fine with no narrative. I'm fine with, if it works. But if you're gonna tell the narrative, when you get into it, it's got to be about something. You've got to have those emotional stakes, and you've got to communicate why should we care instead of just, well, I guess they have to do this now. And it is such a bummer to feel that about. I mean, not that I don't feel that about blockbusters all the time. All the time. Like, okay, here's the climax,
Yeah.
Okay, I guess you gotta, defeat this dude. I wonder how long I'm gonna be sitting here, watching $50 million on the screen wasted in something I just don't care about.
The thing is, if you were to take this as right, we know this ends, and for spoilers that no one does know where this ends, so take your earphones out now for a second. But we know this ends with Paul. He becomes, I'll put it in inverted commas, the Messiah. The Kwisatz Haderach, or the Muad'Dib kind of figure for Fremen, and he leads those people against the Harkonnen on Arrakis. Like, he becomes that leader figure for good or ill. Like, that we'll save for the next story. This is still, from beginning to end of that whole story, and when it goes into Dune Messiah and all the others, is the story of a Messiah figure. It's the history of this Messiah figure that, again, spoilers, ends up ruling an empire. This is their saga from, but basically that low point is the turning point of going to, if you were to see, if you were to watch a biopic, I know, one of those things, some sort of biography film of like a musician or an actor or a boxer or sports. Box is a good example. There'll be some sports, film where they're like, you're not good enough to be the champ, and then they go on to become the champ and the greatest champion of all time. What those things. If that's the turning point, if the killing of that man becomes the turning point of this saga to him becoming the emperor of the Imperium and leading the Fremen, it should feel like something. I should feel like I'm watching some epic journey of this spoilt kid's life in a palace to becoming this great leader, and I do not feel that at all. And that's why I think, and that's why I think that last 45 minutes is so misplaced. Because if you're gonna, like you say, get them to the Fremen, but stop there. Don't give me that journey, or take them to their low point and leave them there for me to come back. But if you need to be telling this, if you're telling this epic saga, fucking, I feel more when the door closes on Michael Corleone at the end of The Godfather. The good man that's gone bad. That sort of. If you're going on that story of The Godfather and all this other stuff, then tell me that story. But this, I don't know. This doesn't feel like this. The end of this film feels like some soft kid who's been saved.
Yeah, no, it does, and who is suddenly a ninja perfect martial artist, against somebody who, we hear, is it Duncan, brought him the closest he has to death,
Yeah.
or it's anyway, yeah, I think it is Duncan. But yeah, I mean, you're right, and there's this talk about you have to die for, Muad'Dib figure to be. Oh yeah, well, that should feel like a death. Not just I'm killing a guy, but like I have lost everything. I mean, this is the classic, downward arc. And you don't have to go to wrestling for this. You can go to, every academic, inventor, all of these stories. They reached a point at which, like you've lost everything. You had to move because you were going to go to debtor's prison or whatever. And then you came to America, or you moved out west, and you reinvented yourself, and somehow you clawed yourself back up, and that's a great story. It's a classic American arc, right? I mean, this is that story, You've lost, but I don't feel like it's the scorched earth. I don't feel invested in that. And that is such an obvious way of making part one feel like it's a complete story. Not that the story's really done, but that it's taken characters to the end of their arc. And you've killed off a bunch of characters. I mean, the cast for part two is going to be, similar, but a bunch of characters are gone. A bunch of characters are suddenly more important. Okay. I mean, it should feel like you've gone somewhere. And this is a movie that gives you such visuals and has so much to recommend it. And yet I don't feel like it's really taken me somewhere. And by the end, there's also the problem of like, I guess you stumbled into that same tribe of Fremen that Duncan went out and visited, right? Like, how did you land? They don't know where this is. Not to be that guy who's like, what is the geography of Arrakis? I'm not that guy, but I need a sense of, I mean, at that point, I'm so checked out that I don't even give a shit.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think when we're coming sort of to the end of this, so I think we'll round it out with some final thoughts because I think we're both coming to the conclusion though that like there's good at the beginning, and then there's bad at the end. So as they say, it's a game of two halves. To continue the sports analogies.
But I mean, this is a movie that I want to succeed. Even with, I mean, I still think this is, it's better than average. It's like a 6 out of 10 for me. And I would say that it's a visual feast. There's a lot to recommend it. Hans Zimmer. I mean, I have problems where I'm like, is that in the scene or not? But I mean, it's a great score, great direction, great performances for the most part. And yet it seems less than some of its parts. Having said that, I want this to succeed. I'm so glad that part two is being made. And I love auteur cinema. I love that Warner's is funding this. I still don't understand why, even as a Dune fan. But it's just such a strange thing. It's one of those things where I admire it more than I enjoy it.
Yes. I'm very much the same. I think I came out of this having enjoyed it. I thought it was good. I thought visually, like you say, it's stunning. There are scenes in this that like it was shot on location. Like they went and shot this in North Africa or somewhere like that. Like it looks
Abu Dhabi and stuff.
It looks great and benefits from that. And sets were built, and it feels physical, and it has a quality that I absolutely adore. And so I'm for all that. Like I support that, and like yourself, I want this film to succeed. And the opening of this film, like the first hour, I'd say, like that opening is great, and it starts to. But as you introduce more characters and bits and pieces, like I'm all for it. Like that first hour is solid, really solid. You get to learn about the Atreides and the Harkonnens and all the different characters and stuff. Like it's really good. It starts to sort of wobble when they arrive on Arrakis. And it's still good. I'm still enjoying it, but I'm starting to notice narrative and emotional sort of like things where I'm like, okay, I'm sort of like you said, I'm checking out a little bit. This scene's going on too long. It looks great, but whatever. And then I'm sort of jumbled up again. Oh, we've got the invasion, and I'm on board with that. And there's been some other bits keep me interested. And then I just sort of like peter out. Like it sort of just comes to an end. I remember I sat in the cinema like after this film ended for a couple of minutes watching the credits, and there was two groups of people. There were the people that were like, "Oh my god, this is cinema. This is what I've been waiting for." And like, oh great, I'm so glad you find it. And then there was just some old guy in front of me that just went, "What the fuck was that?" and left. And you're like, yeah, I'm somewhere between you two. There's moments where I'm like, yeah, I'm all in on this. And there's other bits where I'm like, I have no idea why these choices were made. Yeah. I do want this. I'm very excited for part two. It's got the great cast again. There's still some good people. I think there's so much more story to tell. It's got this story has an interesting endpoint. Like it's not traditional savior story. So I'm interested how they do it. and how people take it as well.
Yeah. Well, and it's about ideas. I mean,
Yeah.
look, I mean, I'm not, I'm not the biggest, fan of Alien, as a franchise. But I want it to do well because it has some ideas in it, and I'd like a franchise that's not just kitty. I mean, or owned by, I guess it is owned by Disney, but not, it's not Marvel superheroes. I mean, I am invested in the idea of a science fantasy franchise that's about these big ideas. I think that's phenomenal. You are misremembering the time because watching it again, I was watching it on HBO Max, and I've got I'm constantly sort of pausing it because I'm watching it by myself this time. And I could tell you, I mean, it's a 2.5-hour movie. At 1:15, we're already in the assault on the, on the.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So well, I remembered it the same way that you did. And when I got to the point where I was like, oh, this is just so brilliant. And I was like, yeah, here's the fight, with Duncan or whatever. Here's the, the Benny Jesuit, with the box of pain and all that. It just goes on. This is going on a little long. Let's see where I am. It's like, oh, that, this is early.
Yeah.
I mean, that stuff that we like so much is really not that much material. And I just, I don't know. I mean, I wish that segment were longer, and really the whole, Attack on the City is really the third act, and you follow a more traditional structure. But bless them. I can't wait for Sisterhood of Dune. I want this to be a franchise.
Yes,
I want this to
it's
succeed.
a HBO series, isn't it?
Yeah, and supposedly Denis Villeneuve is going to direct the first episode. Whether he does or not, he's had input. The screenwriter on that was pulled off of that to do Dune Part 2. So, I mean, there's connection there. I want this to be successful, and I also want Time Warner to succeed. I want the idea of getting great directors and giving them more, not carte blanche, but a lot more,
things
freedom.
to do.
I want that instead of the cookie cutter approach.
I agree. No, I like this idea that, like, do I like everything that Christopher Nolan's done? No, I don't. But every single film I will give a go. I haven't seen Tenet yet, but I know that I will. The moment I get an opportunity to see it, I will. Same with Denis Villeneuve. I love his back catalogue. I think he's done some amazing films, and not just Blade Runner 2049. I think Prisoners is great, like legit good film. It's an amazing film. So yeah, I like this idea of auteur cinema. More than that, though, like you say, being the sort of the sci-fi nerd and doing what we do, I hope that studios see this, and hopefully it is a success enough that studios go, oh, maybe that's the next thing. Maybe that's what we're ready for. Some, and they'll reach to other properties that are a bit more, thought heavy. Maybe we'll see some other sort of like Isaac Asimov or Philip K. Dick. Maybe I say Foundation has just been made for Apple, so maybe there is a bit of a change coming that they're like, actually we can do more ideas heavy sci-fi and people will take it. So fingers crossed that there will be some really good things will come from this.
Yeah, amen. We're in the exact same boat.
Yes Unfortunately it's a boat off Dune. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, there you go. We've done a bonus episode for you, and I hope you've enjoyed us talking about a sort of a film that's recently been released. And I hope you've seen it before we talked about it, because we spoiled the shit out of that one. But if you like what we're doing, obviously come and join us. The rest, we're banging our way through season 3. We've got some great films coming up, and we are already working on our inter-season sort of like schedule for what we're going to do straight after season 3, and it'll come out soon. We have got a massive project that we're working on for season 4. Some amazing films in there, so keep your ears on to what we're doing, and you'll see. And if you really like what we're doing, do the usual things. Go find us, leave a review, and find us on Patreon, www.patreon.com/20cgmedia. Julie and I do a whole thing on there about the Twilight Zone on a weekly basis, and there's all kinds of other podcasts and stuff on there as well. So go check that out. It'll be links below, as always. Julian, thank you so much for talking Dune Part 1 with me.
It's been my honor. And by the way, that is the title. It's Dune Part 1, whether it's comma or colon. It is not Dune. Anyone saying the title is Dune is incorrect. Its
Yes.
on-screen title is Dune Part 1.
Yes, not on poster though. I'll have you know. Go back to marketing and deception.
Hmm. That's true.
But then
I want more Jason Momoa kicking ass. I mean,
yeah, well, Aquaman 2 is coming soon. I'm sure you're looking
God.
forward to that one.
whew. Yeah, I mean, this looks like Citizen Kane. You know, I mean, I'll watch this a million times compared to that.
Excellent. Well, maybe one day I'll get you to watch it. I'll see if I can make it a sci-fi film. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.